Hey everybody, this is Blake here and welcome to my review of the Incredible Burt Wonderstone. If you're wondering where I am actually filming in my room. I'm just using a different angle because I'm testing my new camera. Hopefully it looks and sounds okay. Please tell me what you think. I saw a little bit in terms of the video and I thought it looked fine, but the audio worries me, so I'll probably have to buy a new mic or something, or maybe I could attach my current headset to this somehow. I'm really bad at figuring this shit out. And yeah, I am perfectly aware that my blinds look like ass. They are quite shredded, aren't they? I'll have to buy some new ones. I don't know how I didn't notice that before. I guess I've been so used to it. So yeah, on to the movie. The critics shredded Burt Wonderstone, and I usually don't take the critics too seriously when it comes to certain genres, especially comedy, because they could analyze and critique it all they want. The real question is, are we laughing? I can give a shit about, what the movie does wrong in terms of structure or character development, as long as those characters are making me laugh and the situations are making me laugh. And I don't feel like critics ever really consider that. But at the same time, in this case, I actually agree with a lot they said. And what's, I think, important to remember, it's not just that the critics, said bad things about the movie. Most of their problems actually do tie in with the humor. But at the same time, I actually found it to be pretty amusing. Is it laugh out loud funny? Sometimes. I will say that provided a good joke or two every scene. But at the same time, to me, God, how many times have I said at the same time? You see, for me, comedies, the best comedies, they're very quotable. They have memorable material that we loved describing to our friends and family members. But this didn't really provide a lot about that. In fact, honestly, I can't remember a whole lot about this movie already, even though I just saw it earlier this afternoon. So that's definitely a bad sign, but I do still remember that throughout the majority of the viewing I was laughing. So keep that in mind, and hopefully throughout this review I'll explain why I thought it was funny. Comedy is always very difficult to review because I could really just stop there. But on to why the critics disliked it and what I agreed with there. First off, I heard some complaints that the story was dated. Indeed, I think, yeah, this would have been a lot funnier maybe 10 years ago when David Blaine and Criss Angel were much more in everyone's mindset. Maybe it wasn't 10 years ago, but it doesn't seem like you hear too much about them anymore, so I can agree with that, but at the same time, it didn't really affect my enjoyment. I don't really consider too much about that. But I did think that this was very formulaic. You've heard this story before. They just changed the occupations. The whole premise is, these two kids become friends and they really get into magic, and they become really big magicians when they grow up and are played by Steve Carell and Steve Buscemi. They get their own show, and everything seems to go really well, but over time their fame corrupts them, their friendship falls apart even though they still work together. In fact, this is one thing I really did like. When you see them, they're like really cheesy in terms of what they say. They keep referring to their friendship as magical and stuff like that, and it seems genuine, but when they get off the stage they're just bitching at each other. I actually liked how they handled that. So that's kind of the setup with their characters, but soon their popularity starts to dwindle because, there's a new kind of magician that's sort of stealing their thunder. This, almost Criss Angel, David Blaine type magician who relies more on gimmicks and, shock. I don't even know how to describe it, but, pretty much, I'll give an example. The first time we meet Jim Carrey's character, who definitely is this kind of magician, he has a guy write his mother's name on a card, and, he puts the card in his pocket or whatever, and he asks the guy to punch him. The guy punches him in the face, his cheek starts to swell up, so Jim Carrey cuts open his cheek and pulls the card out. It's very gross, but it's even though it's an exaggeration of what magic has seemed to become in terms of that occupation, I actually liked the kind of the old versus new scenario there. Even though it's pretty one-sided, it definitely favors the old school stuff, but I still kind of like that confrontation, old meets new. But so moving on, since I totally had a brain fart there. So Jim Carrey's character becomes really popular, and Steve Carell and Steve Buscemi already seem a bit dated, so they decide they're going to have this big comeback where they're taking him on his own turf. But it goes really wrong, primarily due to Steve Carell's ego, and they totally fall from grace. They break up their partnership, and Steve Carell is pretty much left in the dirt. You know, he's poor now. He has to make ends meet, but soon he meets Alan Arkin's character, who was the magician who actually got Steve Carell into magic, and from there on he gets in touch with his roots, and you know, this leads him to the path of redemption. You know, like I said, you've heard this story many times before. In fact, I just watched The Dictator like a week or two ago with Sacha Baron Cohen, or whatever his name is, and that's pretty much the same kind of story. And it doesn't do anything to really break that formula either. But at the same time, once again, I said it again, yeah, I live with that. Really, most movies are formulaic. It just comes down to the execution. And since I found the movie to be amusing, I honestly wasn't that bothered by the fact that it is pretty conventional. But at the same time, and this is where I really felt the critics struck gold, is the tone is totally fucked up. So the first act, it is a dark comedy. You know, they're taking humor from these incredibly insane scenarios. The fact that Steve Carell is a total asshole, and what he says is incredibly cruel, but he does so in kind of a funny way. But it seems like after a certain point, it suddenly becomes a family-friendly, almost kiddie movie. Instead of being the humor coming from Steve Carell being an asshole, it comes from him being incredibly stupid, which doesn't really fit with how he was established, because one of the when it shows him as a kid, you know, he's pretty much forced to raise himself. You know, his mom wasn't there, and they make a pretty good gag out of that. But so the fact that he's totally lost now just didn't quite make sense, and it seemed like, you know, even though he's still kind of an asshole, for the most part, it's just watching him do silly, clumsy things that's where all the humor is coming from, and I just don't think that's as funny. And then, of course, by the end of the movie, they sort of go back into the black comedy mindset. So the main problem with this is you have two totally different brands of comedy. You know, if you like black humor, you may enjoy the first 30 minutes of this movie and the last 20 minutes, because that is what this movie does, and I thought it did it pretty well. But if you like that kind of humor, you're probably not going to like the more family-friendly stuff. So you're going to hate it just for that reason, or vice versa. You might prefer, you know, the more lighthearted, family-friendly stuff, and you know, the safe jokes. But you might find the first 30 minutes and the last 20 minutes to be too dark and too edgy. So that is definitely, I think, a valid problem. Now, why did it not bother me? Probably because I have pretty low standards when it comes to comedy. I can enjoy both, and I thought, as you know, whether it was attempting to be too safe or when it wanted to be edgy, I thought it was doing those kinds of jokes well, even if you felt like two movies have been totally spliced into one. So that might explain why I enjoyed it more. Anything else I can say? The acting, I guess. Steve Carell is more or less playing an even more jackass version of his character from The Office, mixed in with his character from Get Smart. It really comes down to whether or not you like him. I'm pretty indifferent to Steve Carell. I think he can be really funny, but then there are times where I just really don't like him, so he's very much hit or miss. But I thought he did good in this case, even when the material worked against him. Like, you know, he starts off as an asshole, then he suddenly becomes a nice guy out of nowhere. I didn't buy how he got from A to B, but at the same time, I thought he handled you know, both A and B pretty well, so it's difficult to say. I did feel that he became more endearing and likable as the movie progressed, even if you don't particularly understand why he was becoming more endearing and likable. But I thought he did good. There was a lot of funny moments there. I do think he has some good facial expressions, and he could make some lines, you know, seem funnier than they really are. But then he also has some of the lamer lines too, the parts that really just misfire. You know, he's really the only character with a major role, even though the trailers really hype up, you know, Jim Carrey. He's probably only in it for like 15-20 minutes, and Jim Carrey, yeah, he did good. He's pretty much playing the same kind of role he played in the 90s, which was kind of cool because, you know, since then he's become sort of pretentious. Maybe that's a bit too harsh of a word, but you don't see him be in this kind of comedy anymore. But I thought he did fine, even though I did not like how his character was resolved. I thought that was very rushed and hasty. But, you know, if you like Jim Carrey from the 90s, you'll like him here. And then at the same time, if you didn't like Jim Carrey, you won't like him here. But since he didn't have as much screen time, at least you're not overexposed to him. Steve Buscemi, I thought, did great. You know, it's funny because the more I think about it, the more I realize he isn't in that many comedies. He's usually the comic relief in serious movies. But I thought he really held his own here. In a lot of ways, I think he's more likable and charismatic than Steve Carell. And he gets some of my favorite parts, too. But once again, you know, once they, you know, split up, you don't see him until the very end of the movie. And also, once again, I didn't buy the reconciliation scene. I thought that was just a bit too forced, and I kind of suspect that maybe they were ad-libbing because something about it just didn't feel right. It's like they're trying to be funny, but just not pulling it off. Olivia Wilde, I believe that's how you pronounce her last name, I really do like her. In a lot of ways, she's one of my favorite actresses because, for one, she's drop-dead gorgeous, and but also it seems like in most of her movies, she can transform the generic love interest into a slightly more interesting generic love interest. Like in Tron Legacy, Cowboys and Aliens, and now this, there's much more of a personality there that you don't get in these kinds of roles. Even though she doesn't have a whole lot to do, I still felt that she did the movie, you know, some justice in that regard. And she had good chemistry with Steve Carell, not in a romantic sense, but in a comedic sense. So, yeah. Then, you know, the pretty decent supporting cast. Alan Arkin's always great, but I always felt that maybe he's become a bit overrated. I didn't think he really deserved to be nominated for Argo, even though I loved him in that movie. It seems like he's just kind of playing that role over and over again. I think he has great comic timing, but it fits in both, you know, serious scenarios and, you know, comedic scenarios. So he can appear in any kind of movie, play the same kind of character, and it will always fit. And he definitely steals every scene he's in. And then there's like James Gandolfini, he does fine. And you know, I think a lot of the reasons I did like this is I did enjoy a lot of the interactions. Whether it was between Steve Carell and, you know, some other magicians, one played by Jay Moore, I don't recognize the other guy, you know, those were pretty funny. The interactions between Steve Buscemi and Steve Carell were usually pretty good, and every scene, like I said, Alan Arkin, and he plays off everybody so well, so, you know, that kept my interest. But once again, nothing quotable, nothing memorable. If you want to see this movie, I'd say it's worth going to the theaters, but as a matinee. But if you're on the fence or you don't want to see it, then at the absolute most, it's a rental. In fact, I'd say overall, it's a high rental in terms of quality. It's nothing special, but at the same time, it is pretty amusing. So that is my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please check out my website. I did written reviews for Kickboxer 2, which sucked, and Trail of Blood 2, The Fearless Avenger, which was okay. So check those out. Comment, subscribe, whatever that bullshit is. Follow me on Twitter, and I plan on working on critiquing the critics this week. So hopefully I'll have it released by Tuesday, or not Tuesday, Thursday, but we'll just have to see. So also, once again, tell me what you think about this camera, and I'll see you guys later.